Pat, I have to ask, with all of his political background, with all of his experience, with his associations with Senator Moynihan, Governor Cuomo, and this almost uncanny, supernatural ability to retain information and organize it and call upon it whenever necessary, on the air or off. How did he wind up doing this as his life's work in television, as opposed to getting, say, somebody elected president of the United States?
Well, Tim was what you would call a transfer student. He worked for Governor Cuomo, and Pat Moynihan was enormously proud of it. And Tim was a real student. I come over here sometimes, Keith, on Saturdays and do a little hit in the morning, and I'd often run into Tim, and he had his old clothes on, and he was coming out, and he was smiling. He was a Catholic kid who had done his homework and who was prepared, and when he was going to be called on the next day, he was really going to perform. He had a tremendous love for what he was doing, an infectious sense of humor, a tremendous ability really to share an inside story which he had picked up. You know, Howard mentioned that he is a rooted person, a deeply rooted person. That was the Tim I knew. He loved his family. He talked about Maureen, he talked about Luke, he talked about Big Russ, the stories. He talked about the school, the high school he went to up there. He talked about the church. You know, we'd get together often on when we come up there for those Tuesday nights with you fellas, and he would come on the set, and I'd be on there with Barnacle, and he would start off picking up some part of the altar boys' liturgy, and we would have to pick up on it. And he remembered that, and you could tell he was a man that loved where he came from and who he was and the people he came from. And I think he saw himself as really someone who was representing them when he reached the heights that he did. Clearly, he's a giant of American journalism. You know, we hear that statement often, that an institution is but the lengthened shadow of a single man. Meet the Press today is a lengthened shadow of Tim Russert. You know, I was on the other side during the 90s when I was a candidate a number of times, and you always knew you were going into the batter's box against the best. I would be down there in the library here rather than go into the green room, so I would be studying. And he would come in smiling, and how are you doing, Pat? And you're debating so-and-so, tell you a story or two or something that was up. And then you would go in there, and he threw them hard. He didn't throw them at your head. He threw them hard and high and hit right down the middle. He was as good and tough a questioner as we've got in this business. He turned Meet the Press into the appointment show on Sunday. And with due respect to our George and to Bob Schieffer, this was the place to be, and this was the show, and it was Tim Russert. And again, when we were back up there in New York, what you got is that infectious sense of humor, the laughter at what's going on and what people are saying. He delighted in politics. He never got stale or weary or cynical about politics. It was always something fresh and exciting, even though I'm sure this is way down the road in the number of campaigns. But he was a very memorable man, an unforgettable man.
But the real legacy here are the young people who have learned so much from him and who've also taught him things. And Todd is the top of that list.
And with us now, indeed, Andrea, a proper introduction for Chuck Todd, I think Andrea just supplied. Chuck, this must be an overwhelming moment for you. But the point of Andrea's point was, Tim saw it had worked for him and figured it could work for you, and he would do everything he possibly could to make sure that was the case.
Well, I just thinking about this weekend and the fact that it's Father's Day on Sunday.
Yes.
And I don't know of anybody that has made people appreciate their fathers and their relationships with their sons than Tim. I mean, if there has to be a weekend where we have to mourn the loss of Tim, it's Father's Day. I mean, my favorite little just moments with Tim are when he's asking about my boy, or he's asking about David's son, or he's telling a story about Luke, you know, or he's talking about his dad. And, you know, obviously anybody with a son or a father, and, you know, Tim is just such a family guy. And that's what I think, you know, what Andrea was getting at here. And sort of, I think the thing that all of us are so shaken right now is that he was sort of everybody's father figure here at the Bureau. And he was the cheerleader, and he was a consoler. And when you think about any of our colleagues that have had health problems or family members with health problems, story after story you hear, God, Tim called me like 6 times to check in on my dad, or Tim called me to check in on my mom, or on my child, and it's sort of that stuff that you want. I mean, I think there's no doubt the world knows what a great journalist he was. But it's that stuff that I think is why all of us are a little shaken right now. Frankly, it's the fact that he was our friend, he was our mentor, he was an idol to a lot of us, to me. I can't tell you how many people I know that are just sitting there and they just they say, I want to be Tim Russert someday, and it's a huge shock.
You mentioned everybody's dad. The National Father's Day Committee had named him Father of the Year in 1995. Parents Magazine identified him as the Dream Dad. How fitting. 1998 and 2001.
It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable he didn't get the award every year. Is what's
he got to see his son graduate college this year. He was just with him this week. If you're in his office and you're talking work and you're talking business, and Luke calls, everything drops. Everything drops. And there was never a doubt what the priority was. And what's great about that is that it instills the priority in you and everybody else here. It was never, you hear about a lot of people in this business, in the news business, whether it's television or print, who sometimes you feel like, you're not allowed to have a family. That was not Tim. If anything, he would lecture you if you weren't with your family enough. You haven't spent the week, take the night off. Go be with your daughter. Go be with your boy. Go be with your family at home. And it's that legacy that I hope people get to know over the next few days, because it's, obviously he wrote that book and everybody sort of understands the relationship, and I think he transformed me. And there was nothing he loved more. If he was walking through an airport, and it was amazing. Just the fact that I got to cover this campaign with him, even for a couple of months, was unbelievable. But we'd be going to Iowa, we'd be in Iowa, trudging through the snow this year, I remember we were going to some Bill Clinton event when nobody was covering Bill Clinton. There were people who wouldn't want to show up, but it was a lot of people didn't think it was such a cool thing to do. And of course, the first thing Tim wanted to do is, I want to see Bubba, I want to see how he's campaigning. And so more people would come up to him and talk about how that book changed their relationship with their dad. And that stuff, forget being recognized, that's the stuff he'd walk away. And it's like he'd walk around sometimes with watery eyes half the time he was in a public place, because so many people would talk to him about that book and what it did to sort of change whatever it touched people personally about their relationship with their fathers.
To have touched so many lives in ways that you couldn't possibly expect. One of the great gifts for Tim Russert and from him to the rest of us.